I suppose there are moments in life that carve you in two, the person you were before, and the person you become after. For me, that moment wasn't a grand, theatrical tragedy played out on a public stage. It was the quiet, almost mundane cruelty of a blocked phone number. My own grandchildren, Lily and Tom, the lights of my life, had pressed a button and, in doing so, had attempted to extinguish me. They thought they were just silencing a bothersome old woman. They had no idea they were igniting a fire. I never imagined the day would come when their laughter, which I cherished more than any sound on earth, would be replaced by the sterile silence of a blocked contact. But it did. And when it did, I realized the college fund I'd painstakingly built for them, a testament to my love and their future, wasn't just a gift anymore. It was a lesson waiting to be taught. If you're listening to this, perhaps you've known a similar sting, a similar moment of erasure. Stick around till the end, because this isn't just about what they did to me, it's about what I learned to do for myself. Comment below where you're watching from, I'd love to know. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories like this one. My name is Eleanor Maxwell, and for 62 years, I'd prided myself on being a giver. A wife to my beloved Richard, God rest his soul, for 35 of those years, and a mother to our only son, Mark. After Richard passed, far too young, from a heart that simply gave out, my world narrowed, and Mark, and later his family, became its absolute center. I suppose, in retrospect, that was my first mistake, making anyone the entirety of my orbit. But hindsight is a cruel historian, isn't it? It points out all the signposts you missed when you were too busy looking at the destination. Mark met Susan in college. She was ambitious. That's the kindest word I can use. Richard had always been a little wary of her, in his quiet, observant way. She sees Mark as a stepping stone, he'd murmured once, late at night, when we were discussing their engagement. I'd dismissed it, of course. Young love, new beginnings, I wanted to see the best. I wanted Mark to be happy. And he seemed to be, in those early days, swept up in Susan's whirlwind of plans and social engagements. I poured my energy, and no small amount of Richard's insurance money, into helping them. A down payment on their first house, a charming little colonial they couldn't quite afford. It's an investment in their future, in our grandchildren's future, I told myself, signing the check with a hopeful heart. Then came Lily, and 2 years later, Tom. Oh, those babies. They were my solace, my joy. I was there for every milestone, every scraped knee, every school play. I was the default babysitter, the emergency contact, the purveyor of treats and unconditional love. When Mark and Susan wanted a weekend away, I was there. When they needed help with school fees or summer camp, I was there. My savings account, the one Richard and I had built for our own quiet retirement, dwindled steadily, but my heart, I thought, was full. I remembered Richard's words, "Don't let them bleed you dry, Eleanor. Your kindness is a treasure, not a well," but I'd just smile and say, "It's for the children, Richard. It's for family." The college fund was my grand gesture, my legacy of love. From the day Lily was born, I'd started it, a separate account, diligently adding to it every month, every birthday, every Christmas. Richard, before he left me, had been enthusiastic. "Give them wings, he'd said, his hand over mine as we looked at the initial paperwork. But make sure they know who built the nest the fund grew, a silent testament to my devotion, a promise of opportunity for Lily and Tom. I pictured their graduations, their bright futures, and I felt a quiet pride. I never imagined it becoming a weapon. The shift was subtle at first, like the changing of a tide you don't notice until your ankles are wet. Susan's influence over Mark grew stronger after Richard was gone. My opinions, once sought, were now politely ignored, then openly dismissed. Little comments, slights that pricked like tiny needles. "Oh, Mother Maxwell, that's a bit old-fashioned, don't you think?" Or "Mark and I have decided, always a united front, with me on the outside." The grandchildren, inevitably, picked up on it. Visits became less frequent unless they needed something. The easy affection of their childhood was replaced by a teenage awkwardness that felt more like indifference. The incident that triggered the final, brutal severance was, in itself, almost laughably trivial, looking back. Or perhaps it was the culmination of 1,000 paper cuts. Mark and Susan had decided they needed a new luxury SUV. Their current car, barely 3 years old, was apparently embarrassing. They approached me, not as a request, but as an expectation. Susan did most of the talking, her voice smooth and confident. "Mark and I were thinking, Eleanor, that you could help us out with the down payment. It's rather substantial, and with Lily starting to look at colleges soon, our expenses are just, well, you understand." I hesitated. Not because I couldn't afford it, I still had some resources, carefully managed, but because something in her tone, in Mark's uneasy silence beside her, finally set off an alarm bell that even my determined optimism couldn't silence. "Susan, Mark," I began, trying to keep my voice gentle, "that's a very expensive vehicle. Are you sure it's necessary right now?" Susan's smile tightened. "Necessary? Eleanor, it's about maintaining a certain standard. For the children, really. We don't want them to feel less than." "Less than whom?" I asked, genuinely puzzled. My grandchildren had everything they could possibly need, and more. Mark finally spoke, his eyes not meeting mine. "Mom, Susan's right. It's just, it would make things easier." I suggested a compromise. Perhaps a smaller contribution, or a loan they could repay. I even mentioned that I was still adding to the college funds, that those were my priority. This, it turned out, was the wrong thing to say. Susan's face went from coolly confident to openly hostile. "So, the college funds are more important than our current needs? Than supporting your son and his family? I see where your priorities lie, Eleanor." Her voice was sharp, accusatory. The conversation deteriorated quickly. I found myself defending my intentions, my love, something I never thought I'd have to do with my own son. Mark sat there, a puppet on Susan's strings, nodding occasionally, offering no support, no buffer. I felt a chill seep into my bones that had nothing to do with the temperature in their perfectly climate-controlled living room. I left their house that day with a heavy heart, a familiar ache of disappointment settling in. I told them I would think about it, a phrase that in the past meant I would inevitably give in. But this time, something felt different. I felt a resistance I hadn't recognized in myself before. A few days later, I called Mark, intending to talk, to try and bridge the widening chasm. His phone went straight to voicemail. Strange. I tried again later. Voicemail. I sent a text. No reply. A knot of anxiety began to tighten in my chest. I called Lily's phone. Ringing, then click. Voicemail. My blood ran cold. Surely not. I tried Tom. Same result. With trembling fingers, I tried Mark's number one last time. And then I heard it, the telltale series of beeps, the automated message I'd never heard before when calling my son. "The number you have dialed has blocked incoming calls from your number." Blocked? My son. My grandchildren. The word echoed in the sudden, deafening silence of my kitchen. I sank onto a chair, the phone clattering from my numb hand onto the table. The shock was a physical blow, stealing my breath, leaving me gasping. It wasn't just a blocked number, it was a slammed door, a final dismissal. All those years of sacrifice, of love poured out like water, all for this. To be erased with the tap of a screen. The pain was immense, a crushing weight on my chest. It felt like Richard had died all over again, but this was worse, somehow. This was a living bereavement, a deliberate act of excision by the very people I had dedicated my life to. In that moment, I felt my world, the one I had so carefully constructed around them, shatter into a million irreparable pieces. I was adrift, alone, and utterly, devastatingly betrayed. The days that followed are a blur of grey. It's strange, isn't it, how emotional pain can manifest physically. I ached as if I'd been beaten. My home, once a sanctuary filled with the remembered sounds of Richard's laughter and the grandchildren's playful shrieks, became a mausoleum. Every photograph, every trinket, every crayon drawing stuck to the fridge was a fresh stab of pain. The silence was the worst. It pressed in on me, suffocating, relentless. My phone, once a lifeline connecting me to my family, now sat mute on the counter, a symbol of my sudden, brutal isolation. I'd wander through the rooms, a ghost in my own life. The spare room, always ready for Lily or Tom, with its carefully chosen books and games, felt like a shrine to a love that was no longer welcome. I'd pick up a stuffed bear, its fur worn smooth from years of cuddles, and the tears would just flow, hot and silent. What did I do? That question haunted me. I replayed every conversation, every interaction, searching for my crime. Had I been too overbearing? Too free with my opinions, however gently expressed? Or was my sin simply existing, a reminder of a past they wanted to shed, an obligation they no longer wished to bear? I remembered Lily's 5th birthday. I'd stayed up half the night baking a princess castle cake, intricate and absurdly ambitious. Her shriek of delight when she saw it, her sticky fingers patting my cheek in a clumsy thank you, those memories were once treasures. Now, they were shards of glass in my heart. I recalled Tom, small and serious, learning to ride his bike in the park, my hand steady on his back until he wobbled off on his own, a triumphant grin on his face. "You did it, Grandma." "I did it," he'd yelled, his voice thin with excitement. Where was that boy now? Where was the connection we'd shared? The college fund. I thought of it often. It sat there, growing, a silent promise I was still keeping, even as they had broken every promise of familial love and respect to me. Was I a fool? My friend Martha, a widow like myself but far more pragmatic, had always been blunt. "Eleanor, you spoil them rotten. Mark knows he just has to crook his little finger, and you'll come running with your checkbook." And Susan? That woman's a barracuda in kitten heels. I'd always defended them, made excuses. "They are young, Martha. They are just busy now," Martha's words echoed with a chilling accuracy. I tried to understand. Perhaps Susan, with her relentless ambition, saw me as an obstacle, a drain on their resources, someone whose influence over Mark and the children she wanted to eradicate. And Mark, my son. How could he allow this? How could he stand by and watch his mother be treated with such callous disrespect? Was he so weak, so cowed by his wife, that he would sever the most fundamental of bonds? The disappointment in him was a bitter, corrosive thing, eating away at the foundations of my love. He is his father's son, I used to think with pride. But Richard would never have countenanced such cruelty, such cowardice. One Saturday, a few weeks into this new, desolate reality, I found myself driving past their street. I hadn't intended to, my car just seemed to steer itself in that familiar direction. I parked a little way down, my heart thumping. I saw them in the yard. Mark was grilling, Susan was laughing at something he said, and Lily and Tom were chasing each other, their voices carrying on the breeze. They looked happy. Normal. As if nothing was amiss. As if a vital part of their family hadn't just been amputated. The sight was like a physical blow. I was invisible. I didn't matter. My absence hadn't even created a ripple in their perfect suburban pond. That was, perhaps, my rock bottom. The profound, soul-crushing realization that I was utterly, completely irrelevant to their lives. I drove home, the tears streaming down my face, blurring the road. I didn't even try to stop them. What was the point? I felt hollowed out, a shell of the woman I once was. The vibrant, loving Eleanor, the devoted grandmother, felt like a character in a play that had closed without notice. That night, I didn't eat. I didn't sleep. I just sat in Richard's old armchair, staring into the darkness, the silence of the house a roaring testament to my desolation. The shame of it was almost as bad as the pain. To be so easily discarded, so thoroughly devalued. It felt like a judgment on my entire life, on everything I had ever stood for. Was this all my love was worth? I wondered. Was I so foolish to have given so much, so unconditionally, only to be met with such profound, calculated indifference? The despair was a thick, cloying fog, and I couldn't see any way out. I felt erased. And a part of me, a very tired, broken part, almost wished I was. The weeks turned into a couple of months. The initial raw agony began to dull, replaced by a persistent, heavy ache, like a chronic illness. I went through the motions of living, grocery shopping, paying bills, tending to my small garden, but it was all automated, devoid of joy or purpose. I avoided friends, ashamed to admit the extent of my family's rejection. Martha called, persistent as ever, but I made excuses. I couldn't bear the pity in her voice, or the "I told you so" that I knew, despite her kindness, would be lurking in her thoughts. One particularly bleak Tuesday afternoon, I found myself in the attic. I wasn't looking for anything specific, it was more an act of displacement, a way to fill the empty hours. Dust motes danced in the single beam of light from the grimy window. Old trunks, forgotten furniture draped in sheets, boxes filled with the detritus of a life lived. Richard's old desk stood in one corner, a place I hadn't really touched since he died. I ran my hand over its smooth, worn surface, a fresh wave of grief washing over me. He would have known what to do. He always did. Idly, I started opening drawers. Old letters, bundled with faded ribbon. Photographs of a much younger me, a dashing Richard. And then, in the bottom drawer, tucked beneath a stack of his old university textbooks, I found a sturdy, official-looking folder. Maxwell Family Trust Education Fund, it read in neat, typed letters. My heart gave a strange little flutter. This was it. The original paperwork for the Grandchildren's College Fund. Richard and I had set it up together, so many years ago, with Mr. Henderson, our old family solicitor. I pulled it out, sneezing as dust puffed into the air. Back downstairs, at the kitchen table, I opened it, a strange reluctance mixed with a burgeoning curiosity. The aroma of old paper and dry ink filled the air. There were the initial investment statements, the trust deed itself, signed in Richard's bold hand and my own more hesitant one. I remembered the day clearly now. Mr. Henderson, a kind, twinkly-eyed man, long since retired, explaining the legalities. "This is a revocable living trust, Eleanor, Richard," he'd said. "You are the settlers and the trustees. You maintain complete control. You can amend it, you can add to it, you can even dissolve it, should circumstances change. The beneficiaries, Lily and Tom, have no legal access or rights to these funds until such time as you, the trustees, authorize a distribution. I read that clause again. And again. Complete control. Beneficiaries have no legal access or rights until you authorize a small, forgotten detail. In my mind, the fund had always been theirs. A sacred, untouchable gift. I'd continued to contribute, even after Richard's passing, assuming I was merely a custodian, a guardian of their future. The statements from the financial institution always came addressed to the trustees of the Maxwell Family Trust, but I suppose I'd never truly absorbed the full implication of that title. I was not just a contributor, I was the gatekeeper. The sole remaining gatekeeper. A strange sensation began to spread through me, starting as a faint warmth in my chest and slowly pushing back the icy grip of despair. It wasn't joy, not yet. It was something sharper, more focused. Clarity. Power. The fog in my brain began to lift, ever so slightly. They had blocked me, cut me off, treated me as if I were nothing. Yet, here in my hands, was a tangible piece of their future, a future they so blithely assumed was theirs for the taking, and I, the nothing grandmother, held the keys. I sat there for a long time, the documents spread before me, the afternoon sun slanting across the table. My mind, sluggish for so long, began to whir. Complete control. The words resonated. It wasn't about revenge. The thought, when it flickered, felt ugly, beneath me. No, this was about something else. It was about respect. It was about the fundamental unfairness of it all. I had poured my love, my resources, my very soul into these children, into this family, and they had, with breathtaking arrogance, deemed me disposable. A new thought began to form, tentative at first, then gaining strength. If I am not part of their lives, if my love and presence are so easily discarded, then why should my legacy, my financial sacrifice, continue to flow unconditionally into those same lives? The fund was established with love, yes, but it was also established by Richard and me, built on our hard work, our foresight. It was intended as a gift from loving grandparents who expected to be a part of their grandchildren's journey. Not from an anonymous, erased benefactor. The seed of a plan, small but potent, began to germinate. What if I were to pause it? Not dissolve it, not yet. But put a hold on it. A freeze. Let them discover, when the time came, that the tap they had taken for granted was no longer flowing so freely. Let them understand that actions have consequences. That even a supposedly powerless old woman has her limits. A faint, grim smile touched my lips. It was the first smile I'd managed in months that wasn't tinged with tears. Hope? No, not quite. It was resolve. A steely, quiet determination. They had blocked my number. Perhaps it was time I blocked something of theirs. The playing field, I realized, was not quite as uneven as I had allowed myself to believe. The discovery of those trust documents became my anchor. For the first time since the awful finality of that blocked call, I felt a flicker of agency. The despair hadn't vanished, but it was no longer all-consuming. It now had a companion, a cold, clear-eyed purpose. My first step was to understand the full extent of my power regarding the trust. Mr. Henderson was long retired, so I needed contemporary advice. Martha, bless her pragmatic heart, had recently updated her will and spoke highly of a young lawyer, a Ms. Anya Sharma, who specialized in estate planning and family trusts. She's sharp as a tack, Eleanor, and no nonsense. Just what you need. Summoning a courage I didn't know I possessed, I made an appointment. Walking into Ms. Sharma's modern, minimalist office felt like stepping into a different world, a world where I was Eleanor Maxwell, an individual with rights and resources, not just Mom or Grandma. Miss Sharma was indeed sharp. She listened patiently as I recounted the setup of the trust, Richard's passing, and, more hesitantly, the recent estrangement. I didn't need to go into the painful details of the betrayal. I simply stated that communication had broken down, and I wished to understand my options regarding the fund. She reviewed the copies of the trust documents I'd brought. Her expression was professional, unreadable, but her eyes were intelligent and, I thought, kind. After a thorough examination, she looked up. "Mrs. Maxwell," she said, her voice calm and direct, "as the sole surviving trustee of this revocable living trust, you have complete authority. You can amend its terms, you can change beneficiaries, though I doubt you wish to do that, and you can certainly control the flow of funds. If you wish to put a temporary hold on any potential distributions, or even stop contributing to it, you are perfectly within your rights to do so. The process is straightforward." Hearing it stated so unequivocally by a legal professional solidified my resolve. It wasn't a flight of fancy born of grief. It was a legitimate exercise of my authority. "And this action," I asked, "freezing the fund, for want of a better word, would it be quiet? I don't wish for immediate confrontation." Miss Sharma nodded. "Perfectly quiet. You would instruct the financial institution holding the assets. They are obligated to follow the trustee's directions. The beneficiaries would not be notified by the institution unless they attempted to access funds or information they are not privy to. When do you anticipate they might expect to draw from it?" "Lily, my granddaughter, is 17, I replied. "She'll be applying to colleges next year. I imagine they would expect it to be available then." That gave me a timeline. A year. A year for them to perhaps reconsider their actions, though a bitter little voice inside me whispered that was unlikely without a catalyst. The plan began to take shape, not as an act of malice, but as one of self-preservation and, dare I say it, justice. I would instruct the bank to place an administrative hold on all distributions from the Maxwell Family Trust. I would also cease my monthly contributions. The money already in it would remain, accruing interest, but inaccessible. I wouldn't inform Mark or Susan. Let them proceed with their lives, secure in their assumptions. The revelation would come when they least expected it, when their entitlement met an unforeseen barrier. A strange sense of calm settled over me as I left Miss Sharma's office. It was the calm of a decision made, a path chosen. That evening, I didn't cry. Instead, I made myself a proper dinner, something I hadn't done in months. I sat at my dining table, not the kitchen counter, and ate slowly, deliberately. It was as if a switch had been flipped. The victim mentality, so corrosive and debilitating, began to recede. In the following weeks, I noticed a subtle but profound transformation in myself. I started answering Martha's calls again. I even agreed to meet her for lunch. She noticed the change immediately. "Eleanor, you look different," she said, peering at me over her menu. "There's a spark back in your eyes." I simply smiled and said I was feeling better. I didn't share the details of my plan. It felt too private, too potent to dilute with discussion. I found myself with time, so much time, that was no longer consumed by waiting for calls that never came or pining for a family that had discarded me. I started taking walks in the park, not the one near Mark's house, but a larger, more beautiful one on the other side of town. I rediscovered my love for reading, devouring books with an appetite I hadn't realized I'd lost. I even enrolled in a pottery class at the local community center, something Richard and I had often talked about, but never got around to. My hands, shaping the cool, yielding clay, felt strong and capable. I was creating something new, something for myself. I was no longer just Grandma Eleanor, the invisible support system. I was Eleanor. And Eleanor, I was discovering, was a rather resilient woman. The actual act of freezing the fund was almost anticlimactic. A formal letter, drafted with Ms. Sharma's guidance, sent via registered mail to the trust department of the bank. A follow-up call to confirm receipt and execution of my instructions. The bank officer was polite, impersonal. Yes, Mrs. Maxwell, the administrative hold has been placed on trust account number ending in 7345, as per your directive. No distributions will be processed without your explicit written consent, just like that. A few sentences, a signature, and a significant portion of Lily and Tom's presumed future was on ice. I felt a strange mixture of emotions. A quiet satisfaction, yes, but also a lingering sadness. This was not how I had envisioned things. But then, I hadn't envisioned being blocked by my own grandchildren either. You reap what you sow, a voice whispered in my mind. It wasn't my voice, it sounded remarkably like Richard's. I allowed myself a small, grim smile. The quiet ascension had begun. I was no longer passively waiting for their judgment. I was actively, if silently, reshaping the terms of our severed engagement. The power, I realized, had always been mine. I had just forgotten how to wield it. Now, I remembered. And I would wait. The year that followed was one of quiet rebuilding for me. The pottery classes became a source of genuine pleasure, and I found a small circle of new acquaintances there, women my age with their own stories, their own lives. I reconnected with cousins I hadn't seen in years, attended a few concerts with Martha, and even started planning a small trip, perhaps to the coast, something I'd always wanted to do. The raw wound of Mark and Susan's betrayal hadn't fully healed, I doubted it ever would, but it had begun to scar over, becoming a part of my history rather than the entirety of my present. I still missed Lily and Tom, a persistent ache in my heart, especially on birthdays and holidays, but the sharp, incapacitating grief had lessened. I sent them cards, simple ones, with no expectation of acknowledgement. None came. Then, one crisp October afternoon, almost 18 months after the blocking incident, the phone rang. An unfamiliar number. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something made me answer. Hello. Mom? It was Mark. His voice was strained, tight with an emotion I couldn't quite place. Annoyance? Panic? My heart gave a jolt, but I kept my voice even. Mark. This is a surprise after all this time, not a word, and now this. Yeah, well. Listen, Mom, something's wrong with Lily's college fund. We are trying to sort out her applications, you know, for early admission, and we need to show proof of funds for a couple of them. Susan tried to access the account information online, and it's locked. Said to contact the trustee. That's you, right? His tone was impatient, as if I were a slow bank clerk holding up his important business. Here it was. The moment I had been preparing for, yet my stomach still did a nervous flip. I took a slow breath. Yes, Mark. I am the trustee. So, what's the problem? Did you change the password or something? Can you just give it to Susan? She's got the paperwork right here. He sounded like he expected me to apologize for the inconvenience. There's no problem with the password, Mark, I said calmly. I placed an administrative hold on the fund some time ago. Silence on the other end. A long, charged silence. Then, you what? A hold. What the hell does that mean, Mom? You can't do that. That's Lily's money. His voice had risen, laced now with disbelief and anger. Actually, Mark, I replied, my voice still quiet but firm, the practice of the past year lending me an unexpected strength, as the sole trustee, I can indeed do that. And it is not, strictly speaking, Lily's money. It is money held in trust for her benefit, under terms that I control. This was Miss Sharma's phrasing, committed to memory. I could hear Susan in the background now, her voice sharp and shrill. What is she saying, Mark? What did she do? Mark came back on, his voice louder, angrier. Mom, I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but Lily needs that money for college. We've been planning on this for years. You can't just hold it hostage. Hostage. The irony was almost too much. Who had been holding whom hostage? I thought. A game, Mark? Is that what you think this is? I allowed a touch of ice to enter my voice. Perhaps you should consider why I might have felt the need to take such an action. It certainly wasn't a decision I made lightly. I don't care why you did it, he shouted. You're jeopardizing your granddaughter's future. What kind of grandmother does that? Then Susan snatched the phone. Her voice was pure venom. Eleanor, you listen to me, you bitter old woman. You will release that money immediately, or I swear, you will never see any of us again. I almost laughed. Never see you again. Susan, I said, my composure a stark contrast to her hysteria, you seem to be forgetting. I haven't seen any of you, by your own choice, for well over a year. You and Mark, and yes, Lily and Tom, blocked my number. You effectively erased me from your lives. Did you imagine I would simply continue to fund a future from which I have been so thoroughly excluded? There was a sputtering sound on the other end. I could picture her face, mottled with rage, her perfectly styled hair probably askew. This was not going according to their script. They had expected me to crumble, to apologize, to comply. They had underestimated me. They had forgotten who I was, or perhaps, they had never truly known. This is unbelievable. Mark was back on, his voice shaking now, a mixture of fury and perhaps, just perhaps, a dawning, horrified understanding. Because we blocked your number. You'd ruin Lily's chances over something so petty. Petty? I echoed, and this time, the pain I had suppressed for so long laced my voice. Being cut off by my own son, by my grandchildren, without a word of explanation, without a chance to understand, or to mend whatever perceived wrong I had committed. You consider that petty, Mark? I considered it a profound betrayal. A statement that my presence in your lives was worthless. I paused, letting my words sink in. The fund was established out of love, Mark. A love that, it seems, was not reciprocated or even valued. So yes, I put a hold on it. The money is safe. It is simply not accessible at this time. So, what now? Mark asked, his voice deflated, the fight seemingly draining out of him. Lily has deadlines. We need that money. What now? I said, my voice calm, measured, is that you and Susan, and yes, Lily and Tom, need to do some serious thinking. About family. About respect. About how you treat the people who have loved you and sacrificed for you. The college fund was a gift, an expression of my hope for their future. It was never an entitlement. I could hear Susan weeping in the background now, no longer angry, but a distraught, hiccuping sound. Mark was silent. When Lily is prepared to speak to me herself, as an adult, I continued, and when you, Mark, can articulate a genuine understanding of the hurt you have caused, and perhaps offer something resembling an apology, then we can discuss the future of the fund. Until then, it remains under my complete control. The power you thought you had, to simply take and discard, was an illusion. I could hear Mark breathing heavily. The arrogance, the entitlement, it was all gone, replaced by a stunned silence. He knew, I think, in that moment, that he had made a catastrophic miscalculation. He had assumed my love was a weakness they could exploit indefinitely. He was discovering it was also the source of a strength he hadn't anticipated. I have to go, he mumbled finally, and the line went dead. I slowly placed the receiver back in its cradle. My hand was trembling slightly, but a profound sense of calm washed over me. The confrontation had been unpleasant, yes, but necessary. The power dynamic had irrevocably shifted. They knew, now, that I was not the meek, compliant doormat they had mistaken me for. I had found my voice, and more importantly, I had used it. The quiet satisfaction was immense, not a gloating triumph, but the serene feeling of justice, long delayed, finally beginning to find its course. I had weathered their storm, and I was still standing. The immediate aftermath of that phone call was a strange, echoing silence from their end. Days turned into a week, then two. No angry calls, no pleading texts, no surprise visits. It was as if they had retreated to lick their wounds and reassess this entirely new landscape where I, Eleanor, held a significant card. I, on the other hand, felt a lightness I hadn't experienced in years. The burden of their expectations, the constant low-grade anxiety of trying to please them and failing, had lifted. I continued with my pottery, my walks, my quiet life, but there was a new spring in my step, a newfound clarity in my gaze. The real consequences for Mark and Susan began to unfold, as they inevitably would. Martha, who had an uncanny ability to gather neighborhood intelligence, reported snippets. Apparently, Susan had had a rather loud, tearful meltdown at the country club, complaining to anyone who would listen about her vindictive mother-in-law who was sabotaging Lily's future. The narrative, however, didn't quite stick. Some of the older members, who had known Richard and me for years, remembered my quiet generosity, my devotion to the family. They raised skeptical eyebrows at Susan's dramatic portrayal. Then came the financial strain. Lily had her heart set on a prestigious, and very expensive, private university out of state. Without the substantial cushion of the trust fund, this dream was rapidly evaporating. Mark, I heard, was trying to secure a second mortgage on their house, the house I had helped them buy, but with their already considerable debts and his moderate salary, banks were hesitant. The shiny new SUV, which had been the catalyst for our final argument before the blocking, now seemed like an albatross around their necks. There were whispers of heated arguments between Mark and Susan, the stress visibly taking its toll. Susan's carefully curated image of effortless affluence was cracking. About a month after the explosive phone call, my doorbell rang one evening. It was Lily. Alone. She looked pale and nervous, clutching her school backpack to her chest as if it were a shield. My heart did a painful lurch. This was the first time I'd seen her up close in nearly 2 years. She was taller, on the cusp of womanhood, but her eyes, those familiar hazel eyes so like Richard's, were filled with a mixture of apprehension and something else, sadness. "Grandma," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Can I come in?" I stepped back, my own emotions a whirlwind. "Of course, Lily. Please." She sat stiffly on the edge of the sofa, the one where she used to curl up with a book when she was little. The silence stretched, awkward and heavy. "Mom and Dad are really upset," she began, looking at her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "About the college money." I waited, saying nothing, letting her find her words. This needed to be her initiative. They said you're angry because we blocked your number." She finally looked at me, a flicker of defiance, or perhaps confusion, in her eyes. "We only did that because Mom said. She said you were being difficult and upsetting Dad." "Difficult, Lily?" I asked gently. Difficult because I questioned whether a $60,000 car was a necessity when your parents were already complaining about expenses. Difficult because I suggested that perhaps the college funds I was diligently contributing to were a more important priority. She looked down again. I don't know about all that. Mom just said you were making things hard for them. Anne, she was really mad after you wouldn't help with the car. Her voice trailed off. So, when she told us to block you, Tom and I, we just did. We didn't really think about it. Didn't think about it. The casual cruelty of those words, delivered with youthful thoughtlessness, still stung. Blocking someone, Lily, especially a grandparent, who has loved you and been part of your entire life, isn't like changing a TV channel. It's a profound act of rejection. Did it not occur to either you or Tom that it might be hurtful? That there might be consequences beyond simply not hearing from me anymore? Tears welled in her eyes. I guess not. Not really. Mom was so angry, and Dad just went along with her. It seemed easier. She wiped a tear with the back of her hand. Grandma, I'm sorry. I didn't understand. I miss you. Her voice cracked on the last words. It's been weird, not having you around. Christmas felt wrong. And my birthday. This was the first crack in their united front, the first genuine expression of remorse I had heard from any of them. It wasn't a calculated plea for money, it felt real. My own eyes pricked. I missed you too, Lily. More than you can imagine. We talked for a long time that evening. She spoke of the pressure from her mother, the constant drive for appearances, the way her father seemed to have faded into the background of his own marriage. She admitted that applying for colleges without the presumed financial backing was terrifying, and that her parents were fighting constantly. She didn't ask directly about the money, not once during that conversation. She just talked, and I listened. A few days later, Mark called. His tone was different this time. Subdued. Humble, even. Mom, he said, Lily told us she came to see you. She said you talked. Yes, Mark, we did. He sighed. It was a heavy sound, full of weariness. Mom, I've been doing a lot of thinking. About what you said. About everything. I let things get out of hand. I should have stood up to her. I should have stood up for you. There's no excuse for how we treated you. I am so sorry. His voice was thick with emotion. I failed you as a son. I failed as a father, teaching my kids that it was okay to treat their grandmother that way. This was more than I had ever expected. A genuine apology. An acceptance of responsibility. The anger I had carried for so long began to dissipate, leaving behind a deep, aching sadness, but also a sliver of hope. Susan never apologized directly. I didn't expect her to. Her pride, her nature, wouldn't allow it. But even her behavior changed. When Lily eventually coaxed her into a brief, awkward visit, Susan was quiet, almost deferential. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a wary respect. The power had indeed shifted. My healing was a slow, ongoing process. The win with the college fund wasn't a magic cure. The scars of their betrayal remained. But talking with Lily, hearing Mark's remorse, it allowed a balm to be applied to those wounds. I realized that my actions hadn't just been about teaching them a lesson, they had been about reclaiming my own dignity, my own worth. I had set a boundary, a very firm one, and in doing so, I had shown them, and myself, that I was not to be trifled with. I continued to focus on my own life, my new friends, my pottery. I took that trip to the coast, alone, and it was wonderful. I walked on the beach, breathed in the salt air, and felt a sense of peace I hadn't known existed. I was no longer defined by my role as mother or grandmother. I was Eleanor, a woman who had weathered a terrible storm and come out stronger, wiser, and more self-possessed. The old Eleanor, the one who gave endlessly without thought for herself, was gone. In her place was a woman who understood that true love includes self-love, and that self-respect is not a luxury, but a necessity. In the end, the story of the college fund found its resolution. After many long conversations, after witnessing genuine changes in behavior, particularly from Mark and Lily, I did release a portion of the funds for Lily's education. Not all of it, and not without conditions. I set it up so that the money would be paid directly to the university, in installments, contingent on her maintaining her grades, and, yes, maintaining a respectful relationship with me. It wasn't about control for control's sake anymore. It was about ensuring that the gift was valued, that the lessons learned were not forgotten. Lily chose a slightly less expensive, but still excellent, state university, a decision she made herself, saying she wanted to be more responsible. Tom, witnessing the entire saga, seemed to have matured considerably. He started calling me on his own, just to chat, his teenage awkwardness replaced by a genuine warmth. Mark and Susan's marriage, I heard, was still rocky. The financial strain had exposed deep cracks in their foundation. Whether they would survive it, I didn't know, and frankly, it was no longer my primary concern. My relationship with Mark was slowly, cautiously rebuilding, on a new footing of mutual respect. He understood, now, that my love was not a blank check for disrespect. I established my new life, firmly and joyfully. My home was no longer a mausoleum, but a haven, filled with the things I loved, the evidence of my passions. My pottery pieces adorned the shelves, a tangible reminder of my ability to create beauty from shapeless clay, much like I had reshaped my own life. I even started volunteering at a local women's shelter, sharing my story, in carefully chosen ways, offering a listening ear to those who felt erased, invisible. I wanted them to know that even in the deepest despair, there is always a path to reclaiming oneself. Some of the remaining money in the Maxwell Family Trust I used a portion for Tom's future education, under similar conditions as Lily's. But a significant part, I repurposed. I established a small scholarship in Richard's name, for deserving students from underprivileged backgrounds who dreamed of college, but lacked the means. It felt right. It felt like Richard's legacy, and mine, was now serving a broader, perhaps even more meaningful, purpose. And yes, I kept a portion for myself, for my own adventures, my own security, my own peace of mind. I called it the Eleanor's Independence Fund. Looking back, the pain of that betrayal was immense, a wound that cut to the very core of my being. But like a forest fire that clears the way for new growth, it forced an awakening. I discovered strengths I never knew I possessed. I learned that self-sacrifice, when it becomes self-erasure, is not noble, but damaging. I learned that true love, the kind that endures, must be built on a foundation of mutual respect, not on the silent compliance of one party to the demands of another. My voice, once lost in the chorus of their needs, now rings clear, at least to my own ears, and that is what matters most. I found peace not in their eventual contrition, though that helped, but in my own steadfast refusal to remain a victim. I am Eleanor Maxwell, and I am no longer invisible. My story is a testament to the fact that it is never too late to reclaim your power, to redefine your worth, and to find your own new dawn, even after the darkest night. Thanks for listening to my story. It wasn't easy to share, but I hope it resonates with some of you. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And please, feel free to share your own experiences or thoughts in the comments below. Your voice matters, never forget that.